In life, we all have many different roles, and those roles can switch within any given moment, depending on what's needed. Like whenever my little brother needs anything, I switch over to Brother Tim. And Brother Tim advises, offers encouragement, a good laugh, and sometimes has to show my little bro who the big bro still is. And in the right setting, I switch over to Model Tim. Listen, I love fashion. I love a dope fit, some cool shoes, something unique that you don't see all the time, and putting pieces together is definitely a passion of mine. And then there's Athlete Tim. And this Tim can give anybody the business anytime, any place. You know what they say, don't hate the player, hate the game. But there's also Husband Tim, Pastor Tim, Musician Tim, Friend Tim, Son Tim, Neighbor Tim, Mentor Tim, Cousin Tim, Coworker Tim, Social Media Tim, and the list goes on and on. It can be a lot to keep up with all the roles we have to play in life. Brother, sister, daughter, son, friend, advisor, captain, caretaker, helper, listener, talker, athlete, teammate, employee, volunteer, influencer, student, need I say more? All these roles are great and are usually roles where others are depending on us. But here's my question. Where or who do you go to when you're in need? Roles are great for us to love and serve others, but well, who plays the role when you're in need? For a lot of us, when we need something, we often believe that the safest person we can depend on for all those needs is, well, ourselves. The issue is the lie of believing that you have to rely on you and what you do leads us to build walls. Here's what I mean. For some, you've gotten into a habit of depending on you for your future plans to happen. Maybe you depend on yourself and what you can do for the approval of others. Maybe you depend on yourself to get things done in a certain way because you don't believe anyone else can do it. Some depend on their phones and other distractions to get through their day. Here's the thing. Building walls is normally our tactic to protect ourselves from anything that could hurt us. And I get it. When you've been hurt, the idea of depending on anyone else can be scary. In reality, though, the walls you've built to keep yourself safe are actually keeping other people out. Relying on yourself for all things can be exhausting. Being in control of your own life can be incredibly tiring. But friends, we indeed have a good shepherd that desires to guide us to a life so much bigger than the walls we hide behind. Let's go beyond these walls to the wise words of David in the book of Psalms. The Psalms are a collection of authentic and raw songs and poems written by multiple writers, the most prominent one being a man named David. David is described in scripture as being a man after God's own heart. David was a man who seemingly had it all. He was a king. He was talented, successful, and popular among the people for the most part. It would have been easy for David to simply depend on himself and what he did for his security. Yet, David depended deeply on God. In Psalm 23 in particular, David writes about the Lord, who is always present, always guiding, and the person we can always rely on in all things. Let's break this down verse by verse, shall we? David starts off with saying, "The Lord is my shepherd." Pause right there. This is huge. This is King David talking here. Before he was even king, David himself was a shepherd. David spent a lot of his teenage years taking care of the sheep. He learned them, he led them, defended them, tended to them, and knew the importance of a shepherd being around. In case you didn't know, sheep aren't the smartest creatures around, like at all. They tend to get themselves into all kinds of mess. They're prone to stray, they get lost easily because they literally have no sense of direction. Fun fact, did you know that sometimes sheep will just walk to the edge of a cliff and just fall off? Yo, that's crazy. Like, sheep can hurt themselves and hurt the other sheep around them because they need constant watching. On top of all that, sheep can't even fight. Sheep are absolutely defenseless against danger. And yet, David begins this psalm with saying, "The Lord is my shepherd," which would make him sheep. From the jump, David admits that we, human beings, tend to be like sheep. Not the smartest, Oftentimes doing things or doing life without direction and relying and depending on ourselves, but ultimately being defenseless. Yet the best person to be our guide is the Lord. And because the Lord is our shepherd, David declares, I have what I need. In other words, the good shepherd, God, provides me with all that's necessary for me to live, to be content, to be safe, to be secure, and more. Not only does God provide those things, but God is those things. Let's hit verse 2. He lets me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. Other translations say, he makes me lie down in green pastures. Don't sleep on this line. David is speaking to the fact that God knows exactly what we need because we often don't. Even when we think we know what we need, God ultimately knows us so well that he provides the necessary peace, rest, and stillness in the midst of a busy, crowded, and constantly moving world. An interesting fact about sheep, as Philip Keller writes in A Shepherd Looks at Psalm 23, is that sheep don't rest unless 4 conditions are met. 1, they won't lie down if they're afraid. 2, they won't lie down if there's beef among the sheep. Not literal beef, but if there's tension among the flock. 3, sheep won't lie down if they're being bothered by flies and parasites. If something is physically bothering them, And 4, sheep can't lie down if they're hungry. I can relate to that last one the most. Cannot go to bed on an empty stomach. But doesn't that all sound familiar? As humans, we can't truly rest when certain conditions aren't met. Yet we can relax in knowing that the good shepherd, he provides all that we need. David continues, he renews my life. He leads me along the right paths for his name's sake. Because we can rest in the security and stability that God brings, David exclaims that our souls are restored. That means brought back to full and flourishing state. But have you ever been so tired, so exhausted, felt like you were just going through the motions instead of truly living life? With God, with following the leading of the Good Shepherd, we get fresh air and a new wave of joy, encouragement, excitement, and passion. And on top of all of that, the Lord guides. The Lord guided and led David to the right path. Moving in the right direction always allows you to live life with fewer regrets, less shame, and with more anticipation of where the journey with God leads. The wrong path leads to more heartbreak, more shame and regret, and less trust that God truly has a plan for your life. The Lord leads you on the right paths for his name's sake. It's not because you did or will do anything for him, because he is good. It's out of his own character that he leads us. He cares for you more than you know. Verse 4 says, even when I go through the darkest valley, I fear no danger, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Key word here, when. For some of you, that's the very reason why you found it easier just to rely on yourself. You've gone through a dark valley. You've gone through a difficult time where no one else really showed up for you. So you just thought it'd be easier to show up for yourself. But here's the good news. David exclaims that even when he goes through the dark valley, he doesn't fear danger because the good shepherd is with him. And the good shepherd is with you too. David continues, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. David is going in on continually reminding us the fact that God is a provider. The Lord is intentional and has more than we could ever dream of and is personal in his care for us. And not only does the Lord provide for us when life is smooth sailing, but he also provides in the midst of our enemies being present. Your enemies may be the temptations you may struggle with, or even the things that are keeping you from growing in a relationship with God. No matter the circumstance, God's got you. David ends this psalm with a blessing. He says, only goodness and faithful love will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord as long as I live. What a beautiful picture. By following the Good Shepherd, David knew that goodness and faithful love would follow him too. That no matter what he faced, no matter how things turned out, the best role that he could be is a sheep. He rested completely in the fact that he had no need to rely on himself. God was, is, and always will be where we can find security. So back to that wall. we've gone through all of Psalm 23, and I don't know about you, but I'm walking away from here more in awe of God than I was before. For so many of us, this is where we could find ourselves, building our own version of security and safety and thinking that we have to guide, we have to lead and live on our own. But ultimately, guards can come down with a good God and with a good shepherd. We can rest in knowing that we don't have to have it all together. We don't have to have the perfect plan. We don't have to depend on ourselves for protection and provision and popularity. We simply have to rest in God's guidance. We can walk with him and trust that he is good. And if you don't believe me, remember David. Remember the countless amount of people in the Bible who can attest to God being good. Ask a friend or an adult around you who loves God and ask them why. Let them share their story. Friends, we no longer have to live in the confines of the walls that we build. With God, there truly is freedom beyond these walls.